Before we dive into this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I was in the kitchen when the front door closed behind the rest of the family. It was one of those rare weekends where everyone was out for the day. My parents had gone to visit some relatives and my stepbrother Alex had stayed behind, claiming he had a lot of schoolwork to finish. It wasn't unusual for me to be alone with Alex, but something about today felt different. There was a certain stillness in the house that made everything seemed louder than usual, even the faintest sound. I got myself busy making lunch, trying to ignore the weird feeling in my stomach. Alex had been acting a little distant lately, more than usual. We'd never been particularly close, but after our parents got married a few years ago, things always felt tense between us. I just finished chopping some vegetables when I heard him walking down the stairs. His steps were slow and deliberate, like he was thinking about something. He was looking at me with a kind of thoughtful expression, like he was thinking about something. He came into the room and stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. "Hey, Jess," he said, his voice calm but with an intriguing edge. "What are you making?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. "Just some pasta," I replied, trying to keep my tone light and playful. "Want some?" he said, his eyes never leaving mine. I could feel his gaze on me as I moved around the kitchen, and it made me feel excited. I followed him into the kitchen, feeling a little nervous. "Everything okay?" I finally asked, turning to face him. He had that look on his face again, the one I'd noticed over the past few weeks but never dared to question. "Yeah," he replied, his eyes sparkling with a hint of mischief. "Why?" I smirked back, focusing back on the task at hand. Suddenly, he walked over to the counter and stood close, too close. I could smell his cologne, fresh and a little... It was a truly overwhelming experience in the small space. He started his voice low, and it was just the two of us there today. There was a brief pause, and I was so excited I didn't dare look up at him. No parents, no interruptions. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. I knew I said I'd keep my voice steady, but I couldn't hide the excitement. The air between us grew heavy, and I turned off the stove and started to plate the food, but my hands were shaking slightly. I was so excited I didn't know where this was going, and a part of me didn't want to. I was torn between two emotions, curiosity and excitement. Alex reached out and brushed my arm lightly, and even though it was just a tiny touch, it sent an unexpected jolt through me. I stiffened, wondering what was going on. I tried to play it cool, asking half-jokingly, "What's up with you?" Instead of backing off, he leaned in closer. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately," he said, his voice almost a whisper. The words hung in the air like an unspoken promise, and suddenly I realized where this was going. "Alex," I said, my voice trembling slightly. His eyes darkened, and for a split second, I wasn't sure what he was going to do next. "I'm just saying," he continued, a sly smile playing on his lips. "It's just the two of us here. What's the harm in talking?" But it didn't feel like talking was what he had in mind. I stepped back, putting some distance between us. Kitchen suddenly felt too small, and the space between Alex and me seemed suffocating. Words were playful on the surface, but there was something darker underneath. Something that made me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, talking. "Huh?" I said, trying to regain control of the situation. I forced a laugh, but it came out shaky. "What exactly do you want to talk about, Alex?" His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read, but he didn't respond right away. Instead, he took another step toward me, closing the gap once more. My heart raced, and I could feel the tension thickening, he said, his tone soft but insistent. "You know what I mean." I turned away, grabbing the plates I'd set aside. I could feel his presence behind me looming like a shadow. I needed to get out of the kitchen, away from the intensity of the moment. "I'm going to take this to the living room," I mumbled, trying to sound casual. I didn't look back as I walked out, but I could hear him following me as I set the plates down on the coffee table. Alex popped onto the couch, his eyes never leaving me. He was waiting for something, and I was excited to see what it would be. I sat on the opposite end of the couch, keeping a safe distance between us. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. TV was on, but I wasn't watching it. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me for a while. We sat in silence, and I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. Each second passed by slowly, but I was enjoying the anticipation. I could feel the tension simmering between us, and I was excited to see what would happen next. We're related, but there's so much more to us than that. Do you ever think about what things would be like if we weren't related? Alex suddenly asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost like he wasn't sure he should be saying it. My stomach dropped. This was crossing a line. A line I wasn't sure either of us knew how to deal with. I didn't answer right away. How was I supposed to answer something like that? That's a weird question, I said, trying to deflect. I picked up the food. I picked up my plate, but my appetite was long gone. Is it though? He pressed, leaning forward. Technically, we're not even blood related, you're just my stepsister. That's the excuse that made this conversation seem like it wasn't completely wrong, but it didn't make it right either. I finally looked at him, and the intensity in his eyes caught me off guard. He wasn't joking, this wasn't just some weird sibling banter. He was serious, and that scared me more. Alex, we can't. I started, but he interrupted me. Why not? He asked, his voice soft and almost pleading. Who's going to know? It's not like we're doing anything wrong. We're just talking. He kept using that word like it was some kind of cover for what he was getting at. I shook my head. It doesn't matter. We're family now, whether you like it or not. This, I gestured between us, this can't. He didn't say anything for a moment, but I could see the excitement building behind his calm facade. Jess, he said finally, leaning closer. I've seen the way you look at me sometimes. Don't act like you've never thought about it. His words hit harder than I expected because deep down I knew there was some truth to them. There had been moments, fleeting thoughts that I always pushed away and never allowed myself to dwell on. I was so excited to dwell on those thoughts with him. I couldn't stop thinking about them. I was sitting there with him, and it was like those thoughts were out in the open, exposed for both of us to see. I was so happy. I said, stop, but I wasn't sure if I was telling him to stop or if I was telling myself. He didn't stop, though. Instead, he reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair away from my face. His fingers lingered a little too long, and it sent a shiver down my spine. And I loved the way my body reacted. I loved that I didn't immediately push him away. Alex, please, I said, my voice trembling. This isn't right. He pulled his hand back, but his eyes stayed locked on mine for a moment. I thought he was going to push further, but then he leaned back on the couch, sighing heavily. You're right, he said finally, running a hand through his hair. I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me. The room felt heavier, the air thick with unspoken tension. We sat in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say next. I could feel my pulse slowing down, but my mind was still racing. Part of me was relieved that he backed off, but another part, the one I didn't want to acknowledge, was disappointed. I hated that feeling. We should just forget this ever happened. I said more to myself than to him. Alex didn't respond right away. But after a moment, he nodded slowly, his eyes twinkling. Yeah, maybe you're right, he said, his voice full of mischief. But something in his voice told me that neither of us was going to forget this anytime soon. The silence between us stretched on, growing thicker with every passing second. I tried to focus on the TV, but nothing was registering. My mind kept replaying Alex's words, his touch, and the way I had responded to it. I couldn't shake the uncomfortable truth that in some twisted way, part of me had wanted him to push further. I was excited by that thought. It made me feel like I had crossed some unspoken boundary, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. But emotional boundaries can be just as real as physical ones, and it was clear that both of us had just crossed a line we couldn't cross. I'm going to clean up the kitchen, I muttered, standing up abruptly. I needed to move to get away from him, even if just for a few minutes. Minutes passed by, and I heard Alex mumble something in response, but I didn't stick around to hear what it was. My heart was still racing, and the walls of the house felt like they were closing in. In the kitchen, I tried to keep myself busy by washing the dishes, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the couch and Alex and to what had just happened. I was excited to see how we were going to move on from this and how we could pretend everything was normal when I was not, as I stood there scrubbing a plate that was already clean. I heard footsteps behind me, and I was filled with excitement as I turned around to see Alex Jess standing in the doorway. He said softly, "We should talk." I was so happy to see him, and I nodded my head, keeping my back to him. I didn't think we should, but he sighed, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. He said, "We can't just pretend this didn't happen," and I was so excited to hear him say that. I said firmly, "That's exactly what we're going to do," and finally turned to face him. I met his eyes, trying to stay strong, but it was hard. I could see the conflict in his expression, and I knew he wasn't going to let this go easily. "Why?" he asked, stepping closer. "Why are you so afraid to admit there's something between us because it's wrong?" I snapped louder than I meant to. "It's not normal, Alex. We're family, or at least we're supposed to be family." He scoffed. "We're not family, Jess. You know that. We didn't grow up together. We've known each other for years. It doesn't matter." I shot back, my voice shaking. "We live together now. Our parents are married. We're supposed to be siblings." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. I could see the battle going on in his head. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The same one I was struggling with. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about the consequences of what could happen if we gave in to whatever this was. "I get it," he said quietly. His tone was softer now. "I do, but I can't pretend like I don't feel something for you, Jess." His words hung in the air, and I felt my chest tighten. This was exactly what I was afraid of admitting. There was something between us that was dangerous, not just because of what it could mean for our relationship, but because once it was out in the open, there was no going back. "We can't do this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It'll ruin everything." Alex took a deep breath and nodded slowly, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "I don't want to ruin anything. I just didn't expect to feel this way." I felt a lump form in my throat. I didn't want to hurt him, but I couldn't let this go any further. I had to put an end to it before things got even more complicated. "We need to stop," I said firmly. "Whatever this is, whatever you think it could be, it's not real. We're just confused because we've been, after spending so much time stuck in the same house, I was excited to get some space and see things go back to normal." Alex didn't say anything for a moment, but I could see the internal struggle on his face. Finally, he nodded, though reluctantly. "Okay," he said, stepping back slightly. "I'll back off. I don't want to make you uncomfortable." I let out a breath. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath in relief. It was mixed with a deep sense of unease. I had hoped this would happen. I would make everything easier, but now I wasn't so sure. "Thank you," I said, my voice full of gratitude. I forced a small smile, but it felt hollow. He turned to leave, but then he paused at the doorway. For what it's worth, I didn't mean to make things weird. I don't know. I guess I misread things. "It's okay. Let's just forget about it," I said, my tone cheerful. He gave me one last look before walking away, leaving me alone. In the kitchen once again, as soon as he was gone, I leaned against the counter, my head spinning. I had stopped whatever was happening between us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. There was something unresolved, something that still lingered in the air between us. And no matter how much I wanted to pretend otherwise, I knew that avoiding it wouldn't make it go away. Days passed, and Alex and I settled into a fragile silence. We both avoided talking about what had happened, but the anticipation between us was palpable every time our paths crossed in the house. Felt like the air was buzzing with excitement, like something incredible was about to happen. One evening, I was in my room when there was a soft knock on the door. I knew it was him before he even spoke. "Jess, can we talk?" His voice was filled with hope. "I'm ready," I replied, opening the door just a crack. "I want things to be okay between us," he said, his eyes shining with desire. "I don't want things to be weird," I replied, my heart racing with excitement. "Forever," I nodded, unsure of what to say. "Yeah, me too." We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving. Then, without saying anything else, he nodded and turned to leave as he walked away. I felt a strange sense of finality settle over me. Whatever had been brewing between us was over, and even though there was still tension, it was clear that we had both decided to move on. In that quiet moment, I realized that sometimes the things we don't say can be louder than the ones we do. Thank you for listening to my story. Make sure you subscribe to our channel for more videos.